This is the OFN Today as the national championship game is tonight. Ohio State will take on Alabama. The Buckeyes right now are about an 8.5 point dog to Alabama. And when Ohio State, I'm going to lead this off because I think this is a great trend. This is maybe the trend of the year in college football. When Ohio State is a dog of 3 or more points, they have covered 14 straight times. How's it going, Kevin Noon?
It's going well. It's going well. Just sitting here in Fort Lauderdale and just ready to, all the buildup, all the uncertainty of this year all culminates tonight in terms of getting to the finish line in the championship game and looking forward to seeing a good game between what appears to be the best two teams in the country.
Yeah, Ohio State made sure of that in their blowout win over Clemson. Talk about that. What do you think specifically? Of course, Fields had a tremendous game. We know that. But talk about everything else that really had to work for Ohio State, specifically at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, exactly. Ohio State did a good job in terms of really taking the run game away from Clemson. Clemson, the previous season, Trevor Lawrence was a huge runner in that game. That was kind of the X factor in terms of what separated the two teams. Clemson as a team ran for 44 yards in this game. Ohio State did a good job with on both line play. I mean, the offensive line did a great job. The defensive line, didn't get a ton of sacks, but got a lot of pressure, really kind of got Clemson out of sorts. And just, the front seven just really locked down when they needed to. And Clemson kind of had to get away from the run game pretty early as Ohio State scored on 5 consecutive possessions in the first half. And because of that, it really got Clemson behind. And Clemson was able to put up some points in the second half, but I mean, one of the touchdowns was kind of in garbage time. It was a thorough game for the Buckeyes. I don't think that they really got too far away from what it is that they do normally. I think they just executed at a higher level.
All right. Well, let's talk about then how Fields was able to have such a big game after the bad performance against Northwestern. There was the injury situation with the thumb. And it was also, of course, the injury situation during this game when Skalski hit him and got thrown out of the game for the hit. So Fields was able to toughen up and come up huge. It was the game of his career, and he needed to have the game of his career. And we kind of talked about that. This was important for Fields, not just the draft, but just trying to win a national championship. I mean, he had been there before last year, losing to Clemson. So this was his opportunity against a rival, Trevor Lawrence, to show that I can do it. I can lead my team when they need me to lead them. And he was fantastic. And now the trick is, can he do it a second straight time?
Yeah, amazing how nobody was really talking about the thumb after he took the helmet to the ribs and had his insides turned into chopped liver at
Yeah.
that point. But he came out and he was throwing well. He certainly didn't appear to have any real ill effects. People were like, "Oh, well, his wrist was taped up or whatever." Well, yeah. I mean, look at pictures of him earlier in the season. I mean, obviously he mentioned the thumb after the game or whatever. I'm not saying that he was making excuses, but I just think that Northwestern was just a game where he was just off. I mean, and he was certainly on against Clemson. I mean, he was making all of the throws. I mean, even after getting hit, he was still torquing up and throwing 55 yarders. Now the degree of difficulty gets that much higher against Alabama. Um, I know that people are going to sit there and say that Alabama, their vulnerability is their defense. This isn't the typical Alabama defense, but they got some dudes back
Sure.
there, and it's gonna be on Fields to sit there and be sharp, and it's going to be just super important for Ohio State to be able to spread the ball out with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. But I think one of the big things that we saw in the game against Clemson was the usage of the tight ends. And I was reading a stat on Twitter this morning before we recorded that according to, I guess, maybe PFF, that Alabama's 127 out of 127 in terms of yards allowed to tight
Okay.
ends. Granted, Alabama had to play Kyle Pitts and that's going to really crap on anybody's
Sure.
offensive stats because that guy's just a freak. Um, but certainly keep an eye on Luke Farrell and Jeremy Rucker
Yeah,
tonight.
because that's something that we did talk about on the last show was that the tight end usage just going into the game was not as important to the offense in recent seasons compared to recent seasons, I should say. But it sure helped them against Clemson, and now definitely you would think if they're going to have success against Alabama, it's going to have to be important as well. And let's talk about some of those matchups because we have some really cool matchups. We have Olave against Surtain. Now, I don't know how many times Surtain will cover Olave. As a fan and scouts, they're just drooling over the prospect of Surtain Olave as much as possible. Same thing on the flip side of Sean Wade and Devontae Smith. So these are just matchups that we want to see. This is going to tell us a whole lot about the talent level of all four of these players. Hopefully, we'll get to see it as much as possible. We'll break all that down after the game. What do you think, though? What do you think about those matchups, obviously, from the Ohio State point of view?
Well, both of them certainly are going to be a challenge. I mean, I think that we'll start with Ohio State on defense, and Sean Wade certainly has had the All-American status and whatnot, but it probably hasn't been the type of year that everybody predicted for him. Certainly, Sean Wade himself making the move from slot corner to outside, but he's going to be going against the Heisman winner. And what happens if they sit there and trot Jalen Waddle out there too? I mean, just it becomes even that much more complicated in the situation. I'd love to see that matchup as well. But he's going to have to come out. But I think just as important as anything, it's going to be what does Seven Banks, what does Marcus Williams, and what do those guys do in those types of situations? Because you're not going to be able to sit there. Ohio State's not going to just completely restructure everything it does to try and piecemeal this and piecemeal this. I mean, you got here for a reason. You kind of have to ride how you ride. So I'll be interested to see how many times those guys are matched up on each other. And then on the other side, the thing is that Chris Olave truly is Ohio State's most important receiver in my opinion. But I think when it just comes down to sheer talent, I think Garrett Wilson is probably a little more talented.
Wow. Okay.
So if Patrick Surtain is locked up with Olave, I'm going to be curious to see what's happening, how they're going to be accounting for Wilson, because the truth of the matter is you go back a couple of weeks ago to the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State didn't have Chris Olave. That meant all focus was able to go to Garrett Wilson, and then just nobody seemed to really be on the same page. But when you have both of them out there, I truly believe it's one of the best receiving corps in America for Ohio State, and I think that Alabama's going to have to find some things because teams have had some downfield success. And no offense to Ole Miss or whatever, but Matt Corral's not necessarily the most efficient quarterback I've ever seen this year. Very mistake prone. I don't think that Ole Miss has the typical receivers that it's had in some of these past seasons of where the Rebels have had some success. The degree of difficulty is going to be way up for Alabama in terms of what it is that they faced in terms of what this Ohio State passing offense can be.
Yeah, besides Certain, you have Josh Joby. He is right now Arled's 22nd ranked cornerback. The top player on defense for Alabama, really the top two guys on defense for Alabama, as far as our lads is concerned, would be their third-ranked defensive tackle Christian Barmore, who leads the team with 7 sacks, and also Dylan Moses, our lad's third-ranked inside linebacker, who leads the team with 74 tackles. The difference, though, that I've seen from Alabama's defense is that I don't see the depth, the talent depth that we saw years ago when Saban was first there, the first 5 or 6 years, when they were a dominant football team. Well, they've been dominant his whole coaching tenure, but those earlier years, it was defense first, and it wasn't until Tua came along that they started to be more of an explosive offensive team, and the defense was okay, but it wasn't to the level of the earlier years. So I think a lot of that has to look. It also has to do with when you are constantly players are leaving a year or two early, the whole cycle, it catches up to you sooner or later. And I think that's where we're at with Alabama. They still have some good talent. We've named some of them, but I think the depth isn't there. You mentioned Pitts, Florida scored a boatload of points on Alabama. If Florida can score a boatload of points in Alabama, we know Ohio State can. So that's why you kind of look at this game and you say, it's more than likely going to end up going down to the fourth quarter, and who's going to make the big plays, turnovers, things like that. The little things are going to determine who wins this football game. I just think the spread is way out of whack. I think that has all to do with Alabama's mystique and everybody talking about how great. I don't know how many times over the last 10 years I've heard the media, or maybe 15 years, tell us how great just this is one of the greatest teams ever in college football. Oh, it's Alabama this year. It's Alabama a few years ago. I remember they said it about Florida State a while back. And yet every time they say that, you get to a point, especially late in the season, a big game, and you see there are wrinkles. I mean, there are definitely issues with these teams, that they're not exactly the great team that the media leads them out to be. A lot of that has to do with the schedule and the fact that eventually you're going to have to play the best teams in college football, and Alabama playing Notre Dame is not a good indication.
No, you learned nothing from that game. I watched that game once, and I think I was probably eating a sandwich at the time. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to the Rose Bowl of Texas this year because I wasn't going to learn a lot there. But you go through, and it's a weird year, as you said, based on schedules, because in all these other years where people want to anoint this team as the greatest team ever, or that team, you're playing a 12-game schedule, which obviously Ohio State didn't this year, but you're playing a couple games out of conference or whatnot. Everything now is just in
Yeah,
conference. I mean, some conferences did have that one game where they went out and played the Citadel or whatever, but yeah, so you don't know. And I mean, and yeah, we can all sit there and circle some of the big matchups or whatever. Obviously, like Alabama UGA was a hell of a game. None of us are coming back and talking about Alabama Arkansas or Alabama Mississippi
no,
State, and not the Mississippi State that beat LSU to start the year, and we all thought that Mike Leach had magic and everything else, and we just didn't realize at that time that it was just a pretty bad LSU team, and Bo Pelini was going to be fired by the end of the season. So yeah, we don't know. It's really easy to sit there, and we love to put things in little boxes and say, okay, well, this team is absolutely the best, and there you go. And we don't have to really have any conversation at that point. But that's why we play the games. I mean, everybody said in 2014 in the semifinals, college football playoff semifinals, when Ohio State had to play Alabama in the Sugar
that's
Bowl,
right.
nobody gave Ohio State really a chance. I mean, realistically, nobody did. And I mean, I think Ohio State benefited in that game that Lane Kiffin decided to stop running Derrick Henry for some odd reason. But Ohio State came out and had a game plan with a third string
Oh
quarterback,
yeah,
and obviously Zeke Elliott. And I think that's one of the big differences this year for what this Ohio State team is going to play Alabama than some of these teams that Alabama maybe played a little closer than it would have liked to in 2020. Is Ohio State truly can run the ball and throw the ball. Florida couldn't run the ball. Ole Miss has some rushing stats or whatever, but Deuce McAllister's not walking through that door. I didn't, I don't consider Ole Miss a
no,
rushing team. So, it's a very different makeup of what Alabama is going to face. And that's why I like Ohio State to play a hell of a game here, and for this to be a fourth quarter type of
yes.
game. I mean, I certainly have it as being a one possession type of game. I'm sure I'll be asked to pick later in this piece, but I think it's going to be a game of where, very much like the Ole Miss game, in terms of both sides are going to score a lot of points, and it's
Yeah.
just going to be who can force those service breaks.
Yeah, and or just like again the Florida SEC championship game, I think that's kind of why I like Ohio State in this game. Is Ohio State's just a much better version of Florida, and now they're also, and it's very important that they're coming into this game after such a huge win. I mean, it was the best performance that we've seen from, in my opinion. You tell me if I'm wrong. From this particular group, the Fields group in the last 2 years. That was the biggest win. And now it's only less than 2 weeks, and they get their next game. So they're peaking at the perfect time, taking on a talented Alabama football team who has some issues on defense that Ohio State can expose. And that's why I agree. And also, Alabama is not used to playing teams that throw out the type of 4 and 5 star players that Alabama has. Like when you watch the Notre Dame game and you see Smith catch a screen pass or a 5 or 6 yard slant, and he turns it into a touchdown. It's flying by guys because they don't have any speed. It's just they're not at the level where Ohio State is. Alabama will not be able to walk into the end zone in those kind of ways in which Alabama was able to do that against Notre Dame. It's not going to happen against Ohio State. That doesn't mean that Alabama's not putting up a ton of points, because I'm sure they will. They're just too talented. I mean, Smith and Harris, you're talking about the combination there that might be one of the best wide receiver running back combinations of all time. So we know Alabama is going to put up points, but Ohio State has definitely got the talent to go head to head with Alabama. That's why, like I was saying, it's going to come up to the big plays, the turnovers. Like, you're watching the games last night, the New Orleans, Pittsburgh, Cleveland games, and you're seeing how everything gets magnified in the playoff games. If you don't catch the big flea flicker in the end zone, if you can't catch the deflected pass for an interception, little things I think will definitely impact this game more than anything. And that is something that you don't normally think about saying in an 8 or 9 point spread. That's why I think the spread is overrated. This game should be more like a 3 point spread. This is really an even matchup. And I think we both agree that it's going to come down to the very end.
Right. You sit there, you talk about the NFL games last night. Try not snapping the first offensive snap in the defense and whatnot. And I was actually on South Beach at the Clevelander, which was definitely a Browns bar, and that place was on fire.
Yeah.
I'll say. I mean, that place was on fire.
Maybe some karma.
Well,
so.
there was a group of Alabama guys sitting at the table next to us, myself and some other writers, and they're like, "We'll give you this one." I'm like, "What, you're Steelers fans?" And they go, "Well, no, we're Bama fans." I'm like, "Yeah, obviously, the houndstooth and everything else kind of, gave it away." They're like, "Well, you guys are in for some trouble tomorrow." I'm like, "Well, I'm media. I don't really care," but okay. But yeah, I mean, and here's the thing too is, has Alabama really been under duress at any point this year? Because Auburn was no good. LSU was no good. I mean, we could sit there and debate just how good Georgia was this year. I mean,
not at the quarterback position when they played them.
I think Kirby Smart does less with more than anybody in the country right now. I mean, I'm just not really sold that he's found his footing there. Recruits like a beast, and I just an average game day coach. But
reminds me of Sarkisian,
yeah, so.
actually. Well, Steve Sarkisian was a great recruiter at Washington, but could never win big football games. And that's why I'm a little bit shocked that he's got such a big job again. But that's another story.
It certainly is, a game of recycling people or whatnot. But so it'll be interesting to see, if Ohio State, I think a lot of it just depends who gets the ball first or whatever. I mean, really, I see a game that patterns that Ole Miss game where there are just not a lot of stops. But then again, every time I think a game is going to go for 95 combined points or whatever, it ends up being, 21-17 or whatever, when I think something's going to be a defensive struggle like the, what was it? The Ohio State-Michigan game, the 1-2 game that ended up being 42-39, and I'm sure I picked that one 20-17 or something like that. So you really never know what happens at this point. It's ultimately just going to come down to who executes the best and who doesn't shoot themselves in the foot.
But what do you think about what you've seen from Sermon over the last few games compared to what we've seen from him most of the season?
Yeah, night and day, and I want to throw another stat in there before I get into a Sermon speech. It's so important to kind of have that balanced offense. And, this is how balanced Ohio State is. Ohio State's rushing offense is going for 272.6 yards a game. The passing offense is going for 272.3 yards a game. So
nice.
That's pretty average, or pretty balanced right there. So, I think that even early in the season, before Trey Sermon started going off, people were saying this just doesn't feel like an Ohio State offense in terms of its ability to run the ball. Even at that point, Ohio State was still averaging about 225, 230, 240 a game. And then, they've really turned it on as Master T got a little dinged up, and Trey Sermon emerged into into the feature back role,
Okay.
and go 331 against Northwestern and a buck 93 against Clemson. I mean, he's just running at a different level. I mean, he's not a breakaway speed type of guy, but his vision, he's I never really felt that when he was coming to Ohio State. I'm like, well, he's not the guy that's like the huge cutback type of guy,
Sure.
but he's been able to stick that foot in the ground and make some moves. And his balance right now, you just can't get him down. First contact doesn't get him down. Second contact doesn't get him down. You need to get multiple hats on him to get him down, because he's just running at a different level. And he's a guy that I wasn't hearing a lot of people talking about. Much of a promising Sunday future for him. And the last couple of games that he's had have been pretty incredible. And if you go back to Ohio State's last national championship with that guy named Zeke Elliott, he had a 3-game run of the Big Ten championship game, semifinals, and finals that was amazing. And while Trey Sermon doesn't necessarily have the full season pedigree of what Zeke had that year, I mean, he could put himself in the Ohio State record books for a very long time based on what this 3-game uh, run could be. He needs a pretty average type of day to be able to get to 1,000 yards, which is impressive in an 8-game season where the first 4 games he didn't really do much of much.
And that's the key, is that you mentioned he didn't really get going early, but there's been a limited amount of games. So if this was one of those seasons where he had an additional 5 games, then maybe he would have that much bigger of a season. Right now he's the 10th rated running back at our lads, or he was prior to, let's see, this came out in December, the most recent rankings. And I have to think that after the way that he's been able to play over the last few games, that he's skyrocketing up that board when I take a look at some of the other running backs that are ahead of him. So, and if Ohio State's going to win a national championship tonight, they definitely need Sermon to have one of those types of games. He doesn't need to rush for 190, but he definitely needs to get triple figures. He has to, again, as we said, balance out the offense and open things up for Fields in the passing game.
Right, you pencil him in for a buck 50 and a couple scores, and I think people are going to be happy. And I think one of the things too you need to remember is Justin Fields and his tender ribs or whatever his diagnosis truly is may not be the type of design quarterback run guy in this game, in terms of you don't want to put him out there in harm's way and risk losing him for the rest of the game or anything like that. So it's going to be even more
That's
important
right.
for something like Trey Sermon to get out there and be able to carry the load. And the guy that had been backing Trey Sermon up for the last couple games because Master Teague hadn't really been ready to go, Mayan Williams, he's back in Columbus, did not make the trip. The belief is that he was a positive COVID test. That's not confirmed at this point, but what is confirmed is he didn't make the trip. He's back in Columbus.
Okay, talk about what you do know. Is there anything else regarding COVID and players and things of that nature that we need to keep an eye on?
It's my belief and the belief of pretty much everybody that's covering Ohio State that the Buckeyes will not be coming in completely full strength. Names have not been confirmed or whatnot, and I've been really dodgy in terms of not wanting to sit there and propagate rumors or anything like that. But there could be a name or two on the defensive side of the ball that may not be available. I mean, obviously we've mentioned that Mayan Williams, the backup running back, won't be available. Ultimately, I think that the biggest thing for Ohio State is they need to have as many pieces as they have on offense, because they're going to just have to outscore Alabama. It'd be great if we were not in this era that we are right now, and everybody was bringing in teams that were, 100%, 100% full and everything else. But that's not the deck that we've been dealt at this point, or dealt from at this point. So, yeah, I don't expect Ohio State to be 100%. We probably won't see a status report much before 6 p.m. Eastern. They may even hold it till 7.
Okay.
I don't think Nick Saban's going to be sitting there at Twitter waiting to see Ohio State posting it or whatever. Maybe he is, but it's going to be an hour, 2 hours before the game before we see the roster, the full roster of who's there and whatnot. But honestly, by that point, the teams are going to be on the field going through warm-ups, and you can kind of do a process of elimination there.
And again, you can go to Kevin_noon, and that'll get you right to your Twitter account. And I'm sure as soon as you find out, you'll let everybody know.
Absolutely.
Look, and I just, no matter what, even if there are a couple of players that will not be able to make the game, there's still going to be more than enough key players for Ohio State that you're not going to look at it and go, uh-oh, so-and-so's out. Now I don't think Ohio State's going to win this game. So I don't see that as being why you would pick for or against Ohio State in this game.
Right. Again, you know what? I think if you sat there and you looked on the offensive side and you saw Justin Fields, Trey Sermon, and Wyatt Davis on the list, that would be huge reason for concern at that point.
Yeah,
But,
sure.
you know, at this point, you know, I don't know if I could sit there and say that there's a name or two that if I saw on the defensive side of the ball on that list, I'd be like, oh, game over, dude. They're toast. There's not a
Would
chance
Wade be the
because
one guy you want to see out there?
I mean, you know, I think you know you need. I think if you don't have Sean Wade, you're in
There you
trouble.
go. Yeah,
Just, I mean,
totally.
and that's again, as I've said, you. It's not a case of that Wade has had just this tremendous year. And again, I think he'd be the first one to admit it. It's not me being critical
Sure.
of him. I think it's just me being honest about him that he hasn't had the greatest year. I think that I'm probably not as some people are. But if you don't have Sean Wade out there, then you get really thin at corner at that point, and then you're having Banks and you're having Williamson and some young guys who are having to step into those roles to really shoulder the load. And I think that at that point that would be more concerning. But you know they roll in so many different defensive linemen that yeah, I think that if they lose some guys on the interior line, that could be an issue because they've gotten such great play out of their three techs. I think that if you lost two names at linebacker, that would be an issue. But in my opinion, they truthfully have four starting linebackers when you throw Justin Hilliard into the mix. I mean, if you lose two of them, that would be problematic. But I think Wade is the only name on the defensive side that I would sit there and see and be concerned with. And I think maybe to a lesser extent, maybe Josh Proctor, who's kind of stepped into that starting safety role, kind of wrestled it away from Marcus Hooker. I think Proctor is very important to the operation as well.
All right, Kevin. So, lastly, what's your feeling? What do you think?
Well, as I've alluded to on a couple of occasions, I'm patterning this off of the Ole Miss game. I think we're going to see a lot of offense in this game. I think it's going to be a case of who can break serve. I mean, if Ohio State can string a couple of stops together and get up a couple of scores, certainly not going to be safe. If it's the other way around and Alabama can string together a couple of stops and get up a couple of scores, I don't think there's reason for Ohio State fans to flip over to Real Housewives of Beverly Hills or anything like that. I think this is going to be a game that's going to go into the fourth quarter, certainly. I think that this has just got one of those intangible things around it of where Ohio State has just kind of been disrespected all year. The Big Ten has been disrespected all year. I think this is Justin Fields' opportunity to live forever in Ohio State lore. I like the Buckeyes to win this one 52-49.
I like it. That's about the scoring is about what I would guess as well. I think there's going to be a ton of points. If you're a big defensive guy, well, you're going to have to deal with it because I'm not an over and under guy myself, and I know what you're saying. You can never tell, but there going to be a ton of points in this game, and nobody's going to convince me otherwise.
Right.
All right. Anyway, it should be a lot of fun no matter what. Looking forward to it, and we'll get an opportunity to talk to you again at some point between now and the NFL draft because, again, there are a ton of players that I want to get your take on once we start really diving into the NFL draft in the next few months. So, Kevin, thanks a lot. I know things are busy, but I appreciate your time. Best of luck with the game tonight. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Absolutely.